I almost didn't go. That's the thing I keep coming back to even now. I almost listened to her when she said not to come. I almost stayed home in Sudbury, poured myself a rye and ginger, and watched the hockey game like she told me to. I was 63 years old, my knees were giving me trouble, and my daughter had sent me a text that said, word for word, "Dad, please don't drive up. We're doing our own thing this Thanksgiving. I'll call you after." I stared at that message for a long time. My daughter had never once, in 31 years, told me not to come for a holiday. Not once. We'd had our rough patches, God knows we had, but she always wanted me there. Even the year her mother and I separated, even the year she and her husband had that bad fight, and she wasn't speaking to him properly, she still called and said, "Dad, come up, I made a turkey." So when I read that message, something in my chest went cold. Not sad. Cold. Like when you're driving in January and the car starts to pull sideways on black ice, that quiet, terrible feeling that something is very wrong. I texted back, "You sure? I already bought the cranberry sauce." She replied 2 minutes later, "I'm sure. Have a good one." 3 words. No love you, no talk soon, nothing. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the old maple in my backyard. The leaves were already gone by then, middle of October, and the branches were bare and dark against a gray sky. My dog, an old beagle named Chester, was sitting at my feet looking up at me like he knew something too. I picked up the phone again and called her. Straight to voicemail. I called her husband. Straight to voicemail. I tried once more, an hour later. Same. Now, I want to be honest with you, because I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking, why didn't he just call the police? And I want to address that right now, because it's a fair question. And it's the question I asked myself the entire 4-hour drive up to Huntsville. The answer is that I didn't have anything to call police about. Not yet. My daughter had texted me herself. There was no sign of distress, no broken message, no cry for help. She'd simply told me not to come. If I'd called the OPP and said, "My daughter told me not to visit for Thanksgiving," they'd have told me to respect her wishes and hung up, and they'd have been right to. But I'm her father, and I know her. I loaded Chester into the truck around 7 in the morning. I grabbed my jacket, my phone charger, the cranberry sauce. I don't know why I grabbed the cranberry sauce, I just did. And I got on the highway heading north. My daughter, I'll call her by what she always was to me, my girl, had moved to Huntsville 4 years earlier with her husband. He was from there originally. Good-looking man, well-spoken, the kind of guy who shook your hand firmly and looked you in the eye and said all the right things. I'd liked him well enough when they met. He worked in property management, which in that part of Ontario means a lot of seasonal rental cottages, and he made decent money. The problems started about a year into the marriage. Small things at first. He didn't want her to take a part-time job at the library in town, said they didn't need the money and it was beneath her. She'd laughed it off when she told me, but I noticed she stopped mentioning it. Then her phone started going straight to voicemail more and more. When I visited, he was always there, always in the room, always just present, watching. My daughter is a warm person. Laughs easily, talks a mile a minute, makes friends with strangers in grocery store lineups. She once spent 45 minutes in a Canadian Tire talking to an elderly man about his late wife because she could tell he was lonely. That's just who she is, or who she used to be. By the 3rd year of that marriage, she was quieter when I visited. She watched him before she answered questions. Not obviously. You'd have to know her as well as I did to notice, but it was there. A half-second pause. A glance across the room, like she was calculating. I mentioned it to my ex-wife once, and she told me I was projecting, that I'd never liked him, that I needed to let our daughter live her own life. Maybe she was right. I told myself she was right. I kept telling myself that right up until the morning I drove north on Highway 11 with a beagle in the passenger seat, and a feeling in my gut like a stone. I pulled off at the Tim Hortons in Bracebridge like I always do. Double-double, plain bagel toasted. Chester got a Timbit. That part was normal. That part felt like any other drive up to visit my girl. The rest of it wasn't. I got to their road around 11:30. It's a gravel road off the main highway, winds through about 2 kilometers of bush before it reaches their property. They've got a nice piece of land. Her husband had inherited it from his parents, with a main house and an older workshop behind it that he used for storage. Backs onto a small lake. As I came around the bend where you first see the house, I slowed down. There were vehicles in the driveway I didn't recognize, 3 of them. A large pickup truck with Alberta plates, an SUV I'd never seen before, and a newer sedan with a small dent in the rear bumper. Every light in the house was on. I could hear, even from the road with my windows up, music playing and the low rumble of people talking and laughing. My daughter's car was in its usual spot beside the house, but her husband's truck was not there. I sat at the end of the driveway for a moment with the engine running. Chester put his paw on my arm. I drove in, I parked, told Chester to stay, and walked toward the front door. Before I got there, it opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. He was big, not fat, just big, the kind of big that takes up space in a room, and he was holding a beer even though it was not yet noon. He had a beard going gray at the edges and eyes that didn't smile even when his mouth did. "Help you?" he said. "I'm here to see my daughter," I said. "This is her home. She's not available right now." I looked at him. "Who are you?" "Family," he said. "Her family," I said, "is standing right here." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, slowly, like he was explaining something to someone who wasn't very bright, "Look, she asked us to let her know if her father showed up. She said she'd deal with it. So why don't you have a seat in your truck, and I'll go get her." I didn't sit in my truck. I walked around the side of the house toward the back. I don't know what I expected to find. I just knew I wasn't going to stand on that porch and wait. The backyard was quiet. The lake was steel gray in the October light. There was a dock, and past the dock the water. And there, between the back of the house and the tree line, was the old workshop. The door was closed. There was a padlock on it that I had never seen before. I stood there looking at that padlock, and I felt something happen in my chest that I cannot entirely describe. It was not quite fear, and it was not quite rage, and it was not quite grief. It was all 3 at once, pressing together in a space that was too small for them. I called her name. Nothing. I called again, louder, and then very quietly, from behind that door I heard her voice. "Dad." Just that. Just my name in her mouth, the way she used to say it when she was small and scared and needed me. "I'm here," I said. I was already at the door, already pulling on the padlock, already scanning the yard for anything I could use. "I'm right here. Talk to me. He put me in here last night." Her voice was hoarse. "After supper, we had a fight about money and he put me in here and locked it and told his family I was sick." "Are you hurt?" A pause. "My wrist." He grabbed my wrist. I told her I was going to get her out. I told her not to be scared. I went to the woodpile beside the back fence, found a splitting maul, and I broke that padlock in 3 swings. I am 63 years old and I have spent 30 years as a millwright, and I swung that maul like I was 30 again. The door swung open. My daughter was sitting on an overturned crate in the corner of that workshop, in the dim light, wrapped in an old moving blanket. Her hair was matted, her eyes were red, her left wrist was swollen and dark. I crossed the floor in 2 steps and I put my arms around her and I held her there for a moment and neither of us said anything. Then I said, "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Okay. We're going to the truck. Right now. Don't stop for anything." She was on her feet before I finished the sentence. "We didn't make it to the truck without being seen." Of course we didn't. The big man from the porch, her husband's brother, I found out later, came around the corner of the house and stopped when he saw us. He looked at my daughter. He looked at the open workshop door. He looked at the splitting maul still in my hand, and whatever he was considering doing, he reconsidered it. "She's fine," he said. "This is a family matter." "Yes," I said. "It is." I put my daughter in the passenger seat. Chester climbed into the back without being asked. I backed down the driveway slowly and pulled out onto the gravel road, and I didn't speed. I drove the speed limit the whole way out to the highway, because I was thinking clearly enough to know that I needed to be thinking clearly. My daughter said nothing for the first few minutes. She sat with her swollen wrist cradled in her lap and stared out the windshield. Then she said, "He's going to say I'm unstable." That's what he always says, that I have episodes. Does anyone believe that? His family does. They've believed everything he's told them for 4 years. "What about your friends? Doctor?" She was quiet. "He changed my doctor. Said the old one was too far away. He's someone his family knows. In town." I looked at her. "What do you mean he changed your doctor?" "I mean he told me we were switching, and then we switched, and I didn't fight it because everything was easier when I didn't fight things." She turned to look at me, and the look on her face, exhausted, ashamed, but also something just beginning to crack open, something like relief. That look is the one I'll carry with me until I die. I stopped fighting a long time ago, Dad. I didn't even realize how long. I reached over and put my hand over hers. The good one. You don't have to fight alone anymore, I said. Okay? That's done. We drove to the hospital in Huntsville first. That was not up for debate. Her wrist needed to be looked at, and it needed to be documented, and I wanted every bruise on record before anyone had a chance to tell a different story. The emergency department at Huntsville District Memorial is small, but the nurse who checked my daughter in was thorough and kind, and took photographs before the doctor came in. The doctor noted a hairline fracture and 2 older contusions on her upper arm that were at different stages of healing. Different stages. Meaning this was not the first time. I stepped out into the hallway while they fitted her with a splint, and I stood there with my back against the wall and I breathed. I'm not a man who cries easily. I have cried maybe 4 times as an adult, at my father's funeral, at my daughter's birth, the day my marriage finally ended, and once watching a documentary about sled dogs of all things. I didn't cry in that hallway, but I came close. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes and I breathed, and then I straightened up and I went back in. From the hospital, we called the Ontario Provincial Police. A female officer came within 40 minutes. She was professional and quiet, and she listened to my daughter for nearly an hour. She explained that what had happened, the confinement, the injury, the pattern of control, constituted domestic assault and unlawful confinement under the criminal code. She explained the process. She explained the options. My daughter asked, "Will he know I reported it right away?" The officer said, "We'll be speaking to him today. But I want you to know that you don't have to go back there. Not tonight, not ever, unless you choose to." Something shifted in my daughter's face when she heard that. It was small, like a fist slowly unclenching, but I saw it. Her husband was not at the property when the OPP arrived. His brother told the officers he'd gone to pick up supplies. They waited. He came back an hour later and was arrested in his own driveway with his family watching from the front porch. I know this because the officer called me to let me know. I was already 3 hours south on Highway 11. By then, my daughter asleep in the passenger seat, Chester curled up behind her like he'd been keeping watch. The call came through my truck's speakers, and I answered it quietly so I wouldn't wake her. "He's been charged," the officer said. "Assault causing bodily harm and unlawful confinement. He'll appear before a justice of the peace tomorrow morning." "His family," I said. "The ones at the house. His brother has been cautioned. No charges there, but it's noted. And the doctor he set her up with?" A pause. "That's something the College of Physicians may want to hear about. I can't speak to that specifically, but I'd encourage you to document everything and consider filing a complaint." I thanked her. I hung up. I drove south through the dark with the radio off, and the highway was mostly empty, and occasionally the headlights would catch the eyes of a deer at the tree line, and I would ease my foot off the gas and watch it bound back into the bush. My daughter slept. Chester snored. The heater hummed. I had left Sudbury that morning not knowing what I would find. The weeks after that were not easy. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people sometimes want the story to end cleanly when the handcuffs go on, and it doesn't work that way. It's not like a movie. My daughter came back to Sudbury with me. She slept in her old room, the one I'd painted pale yellow when she was 7, because she'd asked for it to look like sunshine. She had bad nights. She'd wake up and not know where she was, and I'd hear her in the hallway, and I'd get up and make tea, and we'd sit at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with Chester between us on the floor. She needed a family lawyer, and legal aid helped with that. She needed a therapist, and we found one in town who specialized in what my daughter had gone through. Coercive control is what she called it, that particular kind of abuse that doesn't always leave marks, and so sometimes doesn't get believed. The therapist said the isolation, the doctor change, the monitoring, the slow erosion of my daughter's confidence, all of it had a name, and it wasn't something my daughter had imagined, and it wasn't something she'd caused. I sat in on one session because my daughter asked me to, and I listened to the therapist explain it, and I thought about all the times I'd chalked it up to him just being controlling, or to their marriage being complicated, or to my daughter needing to work things out on her own. I thought about the times I'd believed my ex-wife when she said I was overreacting, I thought about the 4-hour drive and the padlock and the splitting mall and the look on my daughter's face in the doorway of that workshop. I thought, I almost didn't go. And I knew I would never forgive myself if I hadn't. The trial took place the following spring. I'm not going to give you a courtroom blow-by-blow, because frankly those things are slow and procedural, and the papers cover them better than I can. What I'll tell you is that my daughter testified for nearly 2 hours. She sat in that witness box, and she spoke in a clear voice, and she answered every question put to her. And when the defense lawyer tried to use the phrase episode to describe the events of that Thanksgiving, my daughter looked at him calmly and said, "That's not a medical term I've ever been given by any of my own doctors. That word was chosen by my husband." The courtroom was quiet after that. Her husband was convicted on both counts, sentenced to 22 months, to be served in a provincial correctional facility, with 3 years probation to follow and a lifetime firearms prohibition. His doctor acquaintance was referred to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. I don't know the full outcome of that, and the officer was right that it wasn't something the criminal process could speak to directly. But I submitted a detailed written complaint, and my daughter submitted one, and the last I heard it was under active review. His family, the brother, the others who were in that house, while my daughter sat locked in a workshop, never reached out. I didn't expect them to. My daughter lives in Sudbury now, in an apartment 3 blocks from me. It's a good apartment, 2nd floor, with a bay window that looks out over a quiet street and gets good morning light. She's working at the library again. The same position she'd wanted 4 years ago, the one she'd been told was beneath her. She seems to genuinely love it. She talks about the kids who come in for story time, about an older patron who taught her how to do the crossword properly, about small things, daily things, the kind of things I hadn't heard her talk about freely in years. Chester has appointed himself her official escort when she comes for Sunday dinners. He sits beside her chair and waits, patiently and completely without dignity, for whatever she might drop. This past October, on Thanksgiving, we made dinner together in my kitchen. She made the stuffing and I made the turkey, and we argued mildly about whether the cranberry sauce should be the kind with whole berries or the kind from the can. And she won that argument as she wins most arguments, and we ate at the kitchen table with the radio on, and the windows fogged up from cooking, and Chester begging at her feet. It was not dramatic, it was not cinematic. Nobody took a photograph. It was the best Thanksgiving I've had in 20 years. I tell this story because I've talked to other fathers and mothers since this happened, people who had the same quiet feeling in their gut and talked themselves out of it, who convinced themselves they were being overprotective or interfering, or that their child was an adult who could handle their own life. Some of those parents listened to that voice and waited, and some of them waited too long. I'm not here to tell anyone how to parent their grown children. I know it's complicated. I know the line between support and interference is a real line, and it matters. But I also know this: if something feels wrong, it usually is. And a text message that doesn't sound like your daughter doesn't mean your daughter is fine. It might mean she's the only one in the room, and she's choosing her words very carefully, and she is hoping with everything she has that the one person who knows her well enough to notice will notice. I noticed. I almost didn't go, but I went, and she was waiting for me in that doorway, wrapped in a moving blanket, and when she saw my face she started to cry, and she said, "I didn't think anyone would come." I said, "I will always come. That's what fathers do."